What makes a good assessment? Extended response questions. Welcome to the sixth of a series of video presentations which have been put together by Alpha Plus Consultancy with support from EEF and in partnership with the British Council and CBSE. These video presentations cover key aspects of a series of training courses which we have been delivering to teachers and CBSE staff to support end-of-class assessments that we have designed. These end-of-class assessments are for English reading, maths and science for classes 6 to 10. In this video, we will be looking at extended response questions and will focus on the use of level of response mark schemes. Unconstrained questions, which are open-ended tasks, normally require an extended prose response. These include essays, but also more open tasks, such as those delivered through coursework, such as projects. The length of the response varies depending on the age of the students and the nature of the subject, but will be from a couple of paragraphs up to several pages of text. The questions are open-ended in that they require the students to select and organize the information they present. In most cases, there is limited or no structure provided to students, though in some cases pointers may be provided to help weaker students access the question. This is called scaffolding. Extended response questions can often be answered at a number of levels, from a basic description through to detailed analysis and evaluation. Thus, the quality of the answer provides a level of differentiation, and they are said to differentiate by outcome rather than differentiating by demand, which is where there are harder and easier questions in an assessment. Point-based marking of these extended response questions and the shorter explanation questions does not lead to valid assessment, as there are usually no set elements of content that have to be provided in the answer, so it is not possible to match the answer to the mark scheme. Instead, the overall quality of the answer is judged using a level of response mark scheme. This applies to the shorter answer explanation questions, and we will look at why this is the case with an example. This example comes from a geography question, which asks the students to explain how a process works. This means they need to give reasons and cause and effect in order to provide this explanation. The mark scheme shown is a points mark scheme. There is a problem in that the mark scheme contains 9 points for the 4 marks, but it is explicitly stated that only 4 marks can be given credit. But will any 4 points do? Will this mark scheme fairly reward better answers with more marks? For instance, will it reward a detailed explanation with more marks than a brief description? This is a poor mark scheme, as it just lists good answer points, but gives limited guidance for markers on how to award these marks. Let's look at a student's response and see how many marks it should be worth according to the mark scheme. Here is an answer. How many marks should it receive? Is it a detailed explanation which links cause and effect, i.e. gives reasons for how glacial abrasion occurs? Let's look at the mark scheme. It mentions gravity, so that is 1 mark. Then says the glacier moves slowly for 1 mark, and says this is over time for 1 mark, and finally smooths the surface for 1 mark. These are all points from the mark scheme, but the answer does not explain in detail the process of glacial abrasion. The answer is given full marks, but it is actually a weak description with no cause and effect and little explanation. So does this answer deserve 4 marks? The answer to this has to be no. Therefore, the question is not a sufficiently valid question because the mark scheme will not reward better answers with more marks. The mark scheme does not reward understanding of the process and how it operates. It just lists some aspects that can be rewarded. Instead, it would be better to mark the question using a level of response mark scheme, which describes the qualities of the answer rather than trying to list the points to be covered. These level of response mark schemes provide rules that can be applied so they are categorized as excellent mark schemes as long as they are well produced. A level of response mark scheme describes a number of levels of performance for the whole task against which the student's answer can be judged. There are 5 levels shown in this example. The lowest is level 0, which is for any answer which is not credit-worthy. It might be there was no answer or the answer did not address the question at all. Level 1 is for answers which only provide limited descriptive points. There is no explanation. Level 2 is for answers which describe the basic facts, but again there is no explanation linking causes to effects. Level 3 has a clear description with some explanation, and Level 4 has a full explanation. Using this mark scheme, the example answer given would be Level 1 and awarded 1 mark for limited, isolated, descriptive points. Thus, the level of response mark scheme better awards the quality of the answer than the point-based mark scheme. Level of response mark schemes are extensively used in the UK to assess unconstrained questions which require students to explain, analyse, or evaluate. They better reward students for showing these skills than point-based mark schemes, particularly for more subjective assessments in subjects like English or history. Level of response mark schemes consist of 3 parts. The level descriptors, which have the level number, the descriptor, and the number of marks which can be awarded. These are often used for groups of questions. For example, in literature for different set texts where the same or similar tasks are set. This helps ensure that the quality of the answers are judged using the same scale across different optional questions. It should be noted that there is not always a single mark allocated to each level. The indicative content lists the likely content to be covered in the student's answers. It is a guide to markers about what the student may cover, but is not exhaustive and should not be used to judge the quality of the answer, as students could cover equally valid points that address the question but are not covered in the indicative content. Instructions for using the level of response mark scheme. These set out guidance for markers on how to use the mark scheme, but essentially the marker is required to read the student's answer and judge the qualities of the answer against the level descriptor and identify the appropriate level and then the mark to be awarded. In order to help markers apply level of response mark schemes, particularly for high-stakes exams, marked exemplar materials are shown that illustrate a typical response from each level in the mark scheme. This helps ensure consistency of understanding of the markers and allows them to compare answers they are marking against the examples. Here is another example of a set of level descriptors. This is from Class 9 English reading CBSE End of Class Assessment. It shows 5 levels with 2 marks in each level, giving a total of 10 marks. There are 2 bullet points in the descriptor, but this does not mean that there is a mark for each in each bullet point. The quality of the answer is judged and matched on a best fit basis to the level descriptor, and then the mark is determined based on whether it is closer to the level above or the level below. Here is an example of indicative content for a science level of response mark scheme. The level descriptors are not shown. The indicative content is not exhaustive and answers may cover other points. It is not used to award marks as it is not about matching the answer to the indicative content. Indicative content is often presented as bullet lists, so it does not look like a model answer. Instructions for level of response mark schemes are generally 2-step. The first step is to determine the level. This is an example set of instructions, but the basic approach is similar in many assessments. When deciding on a level, you need to read through the answer and then, starting at the bottom level descriptor, decide if the answer meets this descriptor. If it does, you can then go on to the next level until you reach a level which is beyond the quality of the answer. The last level that it meets is the level that is selected. When looking at the answer, it should be treated holistically and the overall qualities judged and the appropriate level which best fits those qualities chosen. A weakness in one small aspect should not mean that the overall level is not met. The second step is to determine the mark. If there is only 1 mark in the level, this is easy and that mark is awarded. If there is more than 1 mark in the level, then you need to decide what mark to award. You should decide if the answer is closer to the level above or the level below. If it is closer to the level above, then award a higher mark in the level, and if it is closer to the level below, then award a lower mark in the level. If exemplar marked material is available, then you can compare the answer you are marking with the exemplar and use this to help you decide the appropriate mark. Remember, when marking, you may need to read back through the answer to help decide the level or the mark. Remember, indicative content is not exhaustive, and other relevant content may be acceptable. An answer does not need to cover all the indicative content to get full marks. For subjects like English literature, sometimes students' answers can show high levels of skills but not address the question. For example, they provide an answer to a question about Lady Macbeth that focuses only on Macbeth, which is not what the question asks for. In these cases, the work should be awarded a mark of 0, as it does not address the question. 0 should also be awarded for answers which are below the minimum standard described in Level 1 of the mark scheme, or for students who do not attempt the question. In many subjects, level or response mark schemes are standard, and it is just the question and indicative content that changes, so it is relatively easy to write a level of response mark scheme. However, if you are looking to create a new level of response mark scheme, then there are some considerations you will need to think about. When deciding the number of levels, remember you can only have as many levels as you can provide clear, unambiguous descriptions for. A rule of thumb is that it is unusual to have more than 5 levels. When choosing the number of marks in the level, you must have the same number in each level so it does not skew the distribution and each mark has the same worth. Ideally, you should have an odd number so that the middle of the level has a mark, but 2 marks can be used as an approach. You should not have more than 5 marks in a level as it is too subjective for the markers to make a decision on the marks to award. 5 marks gives you a top, a bottom, and a mid-mark, and then a mark in between. More than 5 marks is likely to make the marking unreliable. The level descriptors should be describing the middle of the band and should form a continuous progression without any hurdles between levels. For example, you cannot have a requirement for level 3 that the answer has to have 3 examples, as this could stop an otherwise good answer from reaching level 3 if it only had 2 examples. The level descriptors must reflect the skills you are looking to assess and hence the assessment objectives, though lower levels may only award lower level skills. For example, description rather than explanation or evaluation, which the better answers will show, and the higher levels of the mark scheme reward. You should try and ensure that the mark scheme fits on one side of A4. That is, the level descriptors and the indicative content, as this is easier for the marker to engage with and use and will lead to more reliable marking. Make sure that the indicative content is placed separately below the level descriptors and not integrated into them, and that there are clear instructions on how to use the level of response mark scheme. Writing level of response mark schemes from scratch can be tricky, but there are plenty of examples used in the UK which you can seek inspiration from. The next video in the series is going to look at the item production process and the constraints and requirements of this process, irrespective of the type of items you are writing.